People, there are two questions you need to ask yourself before you start to decoupage a napkin on a glass. And you can use any kind of glass, really. You can upcycle pieces, you can purchase some inexpensive ones. It's really up to you. The first question is going to be, do you want the napkin to be transparent so you can see through it? Maybe put a few lights in there so they glow. Or do you want that napkin design to pop? Because if you do, we're going to need to paint it. Here are all the napkins I'm going to be choosing from in this video today. I'm not going to be using all of them, but I needed to lay them out and have options. Our paints we're picking up from Walmart. They're really inexpensive. I'm going to use Waverly's white chalk paints, and I'm going to be using Folk Arts multi-surface in satin. The acrylic paint I just put down, many people had a lot of opinions on my opinion in my how to decoupage on glass tutorial video. And people, because I like to come as correct as I possibly can with the tips, tricks, and information that I have for you, I do want to let you know that on the back of this paint, it says to use on porous surfaces. Glass is not a porous surface. It will cure, however, if you have time to wait several weeks before you decoupage your next project. I, however, do not. So we're going to be using this chalk paint and this multi-surface paint that was recommended to me by several subscribers, and people, I love it. I've used multi-surface paint before, but this particular one, I was really happy with the results. These glass pieces I picked up from Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use two of them. We're going to give you two different DIYs using the same napkin. One we're going to paint, one we're going to keep translucent. And so we're not skipping any steps here, people. We're going to start off by cleaning our glass. I'm just using some alcohol here on a little napkin and wiping the suckers down. I got some gloves on to keep the fingerprints down to a minimum. And before we get started, I want to show you guys the three paints. This way you have a good reference on which paints would work best for you at home and will be in your budget. Now, most chalk paints will give you the same result. I use all kinds, including Dixie Belle. I use that on glass and have not had any issues. I let this dry for about 15 minutes. The first one we're going to check out is going to be the chalk paint. The last one you can see has that satin sheen on it, which isn't high gloss. It's just a little satin. I love it. So you know that I'm actually applying pressure, I wanted to show you how my thumb is changing colors as I am applying pressure down onto the paint. This is the chalk paint, and as you can see, I am applying pressure and pulling, and it does not come off. Here is the acrylic paint. You can see that I am applying pressure and pulling down, and it does come off. And like I said, this can work, but it will take a few weeks to cure and a couple coats. You could spray paint it first with some clear matte poly or some type of lacquer, or even do a Mod Podge and then get a quicker resolve to be able to do it within a day or two. But it's just faster to be able to use this multi-surface paint or the chalk paint. And please, people, keep in mind, I am not a professional. I am just sharing with you what I've learned through experiences or information and tips and tricks I may know, so it hopefully helps you along with your DIY journey. There's no right or wrong way to decoupage. It's what works best for you. It doesn't have to be perfect to be something you love. For this first DIY, since I already stuck some paint on there, I'm gonna just paint this piece up. My favorite way to apply paint is to sponge it first. Tappity tap 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 all over that sucker, and then I'll sand it down and then give it a nice brush paint. It usually takes 2 coats. I had a lot of people ask me why I don't use the brush. You get a smoother look, and you are correct. You do get a smoother look all around. You don't have to sand your glass. However, it took me 5 coats. 5 coats. It took me 5 coats. I waited 3 hours overall for this to dry, just to demonstrate to you the difference. So for me, it's a time thing, especially because I create content. So using the sponge and tappity tap tap tapping and then sanding it, you might see a bump or two, but once you go over with that brush paint and then let that dry, you're pretty much good to go in a little over an hour. If you want to do this and then wait the 30 to 40 minutes to get a good solid coat, it took me 5 layers of the chalk paint. And again, there's no right or wrong way. I'm just giving you information and what works for me. You DIY what works best for you. While that paint is drying, I decided to move on to our translucent piece and pulling our sneaky layers off of our napkin. There's a bunch of different ways you can accomplish this. One of my favorite is just to tear a tiny piece off the corner, especially if you're not using the whole napkin, and it reveals those extra little layers. You can just pull it right off. Another tip is to take a little bit of Mod Podge between 2 fingers and kind of smoosh it together, and then you're able to kind of get the edges, or you could use a piece of tape and put on each side and pull them apart. I wanted specific spots on this napkin, so I'm using a little bit of water on the edge of a paintbrush to be able to go in those exact spots and then take my fingernail and pull the extra off. I like to tear napkins. It blends better in my opinion than cutting in straight lines with scissors. This technique is definitely best when you're trying to get something really precise with your tearing. It's not my favorite just because I don't care for having to wait the 10 to 15 minutes for the napkins to dry. I don't like decoupaging anything that's wet. So I will sit these to the side and allow them to dry, but you guys do what works for you. Here are two options for mediums you can use to decoupage, and for tools of application, we're going to be using some cling wrap and a dry sponge. Whenever I'm decoupaging a napkin, pretty much on anything, I like to say less is more. With this application, because you're using glass, you need to also keep in mind there's really nowhere for that napkin to go other than sideways. So when you are taking your cling wrap or your sponge, be mindful it is super easy to tear, so the more Mod Podge you have, the more muddier that texture is going to be on that napkin. That's another reason why I go little by little and like using a dry sponge, because you can kind of just push it down as you go. To add a little bit of accent on this piece, we're going to create what I like to call mica powder paint. And we're going to do that by taking like a tablespoon of Mod Podge and then tappity tap 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 in some mica powder. The color, obviously use whatever you think makes sense for your project. I'm using blue because we got blue in our napkin. And we're going to apply this onto the sections of our little glass vase that we did not put our napkin onto. Now, obviously, if you take the napkin and you put it all over the glass vase, you're still going to be able to see the light through this. So keep that in mind. I'm just giving you guys another idea as to something you can do with mica powder and with decoupaging glass and napkins. I do want to tell you that this dries really quick, and it's important to make sure your strokes are long and purposeful. Stopping in the middle will leave little dots everywhere. But after the first coat, which does not take long to dry, 15 to 20 minutes. I did a lot of waiting around for drying with this video, people. I just want to point that out. This took me several days. I love you all. Anyhow, moving on. With the second layer, I just went around the edges of the napkin, making it a little bit more dominant to help that napkin kind of blend into the mica powder paint. And then I kind of pulled the two colors to meet in the middle of the glass where the napkin wasn't. If you want to put a sealer over this, absolutely go right ahead. Just make sure that everything is dry before you do. This will help reduce wrinkles with the napkin. I took a little bit of white yarn and wrapped around the bottom. I love how that little tea light shines through. Now that we're done waiting for the paint to dry, we are going to decoupage the same exact napkin in the same exact way, but just one square onto this piece. Next, I'm using my favorite clay, which is called paper clay. I didn't show it here. I don't know if I was having a brain fart at the moment or not. Just get excited when I bust out the clay. I forgot all about you guys. I know the clay is in my Amazon store. I think the mold is. But I like this clay mostly because it can be sanded and it is air dry. It's also really easy on my hands. I have struggles with grip strength, so it's just one of my go-tos. I do want to remind you that if you go to use clay or molds, dust a little bit of cornstarch up in them joints. It'll make peeling them out a lot easier. To attach these pieces, I'm going to use some tacky glue, just like I would if I was using wood glue on wood to apply these, but tacky glue is a really good adhesive, especially when you're using glass. I also have these clay tools in my Amazon store, in case you're wondering. They're not the best clay tools. Don't start me lying to you. I bought them because they were cheap. They're listed in the Amazon store because you ask about them. But if I'm being 100 with all of you, splurge for a couple dollars more and buy a better one. I've actually had to Gorilla Glue gel some of the little metal pieces in because they pop out, but hey, they get the job done. I'm just being honest. I don't want anybody wasting their money if it's not, you know what I'm saying? But they're there if you want the same exact ones I'm using, but someday I'm going to invest in a better pair. These took just a couple minutes to apply onto here. The tacky glue has them stick almost immediately, and you can skip this part. You can add more. It is entirely up to you. Again, I'm just giving the idea here. I am sticking some of the florals right at the top of this. and I let this dry overnight. Came back and painted it, and I am showing you here that there are some gaps. So it does shrink, which is another thing that you have to worry about with these. With my wood pieces, I'll take some wood shavings and wood glue or some wood putty and shove right in there. With something like this, you could use some caulking and put in there, or cake some chalk paint in there. It'll fill it on in. But the idea and options are here for you. You know what I mean? Pick and choose which one you want. I did take a little bit of dark blue paint and put in all the little crevices and around our flowers. Attached this Dollar Tree glittery ribbon at the bottom, and then took some Dixie Belle gilding wax to go over our clay. If you do not have this, mix up some mica powder paint. It will give you the same exact result, or you could use regular silver paint. I love how the napkin really pops on this piece compared to the transparent one. What do you guys think? This decoupage piece and the last one are actually tailor-made to my personal, because I'm keeping them. Okay, mind your business. We're using these 2 napkins and a plate from Dollar Tree. I'm going to just rip up the napkin and put the bike right in the center, okay? We're not doing anything difficult here, just slapping some Mod Podge on that joint, and look how beautiful it is. Well, it's not beautiful enough because I want this to pop out a little bit. So in order for us to do that properly, you want to make sure that you let this dry and then apply another layer of Mod Podge on the back of it. Let that dry. And then you're welcome to come in with your white paint. Yep, all the drying, okay? Let it dry. I know what you're thinking, Brandi. Why did we have to wait for the napkin to dry before applying more Mod Podge? Listen, it's been my experience that if you don't wait for the initial decoupage napkin piece to dry and you just try to put a sealer right over it, especially a large section, it's going to rip or smoosh. You know what I'm saying? Look how pretty. I love this piece. Next, I'm taking this other napkin and I really just want the florals. I love how big this napkin is and all the amazing designs on this. I also didn't want the like very edge parts of it, so I pulled them off and then made sure to rip in precise spots of the flowers that I wanted. I also decided to just leave the end translucent, so this way the center of the napkin really pops out, and then the florals on the outside are just sealed with that Mod Podge, and it gives you a little bit of a contrast from one to the next with the look when you're staring at the plate. I love this piece so flippin' much. I cannot wait to show you the last project and what they look like together. Alright people, now listen, this idea is a little eccentric and I've maybe only done 2 styles of decoupage like this twice, not this exact thing. It's not going to be for everyone, but some of you are going to love it just as much as I do. We're going to create a look with this and get a little artsy fartsy that's going to seem like the vase piece itself is being broken open to reveal decoupage underneath. And people, this is that multi-surface paint. I absolutely love this. 3 coats on this. I did leave some areas where you can see at the bottom there's some brush strokes there, so you can see through a little bit. If you want it to be a little bit more solid, obviously do more. You'll see why I left it like this later. Here is the beautiful napkin that I picked for this project, and I want to get the little, you know, bumpy bits off the bottom here. So I'm just using the water and a paintbrush to get a nice precise line. And then I'm also doing the same thing to kind of go around the florals here to get a nice precise line of different ways I want the florals to go, because I'm going to piece this together. Since it's large and it's round, I want it to make sure that this kind of all went up and down instead of like tilting sideways, which is what usually happens if I just try to wrap the napkin around the piece. And I do want to mention that if you need your whole napkin and don't want to get rid of those little bumpy bits on the edge, you can iron or press them and they'll flatten out. Even if you Mod Podge them, honestly, depending on the surface, you can't really notice them. Once you're all finished with that, this is where things go a little sideways, okay? Let that dry and then grab you some tissues. Now, I've used fabric and I've used paper towels to do this before, and I've used tacky glue once, and I use Mod Podge. Okay, so I'm taking a little bit of water and about 2 tablespoons of Mod Podge, and I put them in the water. I want it to look like this is kind of ripping above the decoupage, like being pulled open to reveal something. So I'm taking 2 different colors to make a brighter, more dominant color than the napkin. Like everything's kind of blending into this. Then we're gonna take our napkin and just start dunking it in there, squeeze out the excess, and tappity tap 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 in all around where that napkin that we decoupaged on there ends. And people, believe it or not, this is sticking on here. You know, I'm making sure that the napkin that I'm dipping in there isn't overly saturated. Let me just side note, okay? I think it's really funny how I started off the video as I'm editing and I'm like, I got gloves on. And here, where obviously gloves would be great, I decided to be like, muck it. And I'm just knuckles deep in that water there. I've been living with dyed blue fingers for 2 days. Anyhow, let this dry overnight, okay? It's gonna need it. And then it should look something like this. And it's gonna be crusty. If you touch it, it's gonna be stiff. And like I said, you could use tacky glue to put in the water as well. That will work. Or some fabric stiffener. That'll probably do a great job too. So obviously we can't leave it like that, right? We got to blend it in there, make it look like a vase at some point. So I'm going to take some calcium carbonate and some joint compound with a little bit of paint to give us a textured paint. I'm taking some colors to blend up to try to match the color of the napkin. And please keep in mind, the way I'm doing the color variations is completely up to my preference of how I want to create this piece of art. You guys do your art vase however makes sense for you. I, again, am going for the look of this being kind of ripped open to reveal a beautiful piece of decoupage under the vase. Also, you don't need a fancy schmancy like clay mixing thing like I have here. You could use a spoon, a popsicle stick, it does not matter. I just happen to have that sitting right on hand. I pick up these packs all the time from Ross, so I have these laying around. Once I had that all mixed up, I then took this blue mixture and just dabbed, tappity tap tap tapped everywhere, all over the napkin, all the way up to like the neck of the vase, because I'm going to kind of create an ombre look at the very top. And I even took some of that color and popped it in around the napkin, so it looked like this was really all one piece. The colors just blended in. I then mixed a little bit of white with the textured paint, or textured joint compound, and the carbonate. So that was also textured, and met them in the middle of the neck of this vase and gently blended them together. I let this completely dry, which took a few hours, and then came back in with that textured white paint and just dry brushed over everything, even some spots on the napkin. So real quick before we get to the reveal, remember how when I initially showed you the way I painted the vase, I said I only did a couple layers, and you could see at the bottom that there were some brush strokes. So obviously we have our decoupage portion on there, and there's more paint that I'm putting on the top right now. So if you were to put some fairy lights or a little tea light, you're definitely not going to see anything popping through the top, because we have even more layers on the top now. However, that's not going to be the case for the decoupaged portion. I absolutely love how this piece turned out. It's so unique and creative. It's just a different way for you to be a little artsy fartsy with your decoupage and your glass decor. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think of it. People, it's time for my favorite decoupage idea of the video. Plus, you know, I kept these, so these are tailor-made to how I wanted them to be. And look, I got the gloves on. This is obviously when I first started with the glass and I'm cleaning everything off. And, you know, by the time I got to that fourth decoupage idea days later, I didn't care about them gloves, all that waiting and drying time. Anyhow, we're going to just sponge these suckers with some white paint. And I don't remember if I used the chalk or the multi-surface, but either one will give you the same result, really. After working with both of them, I really like both of those paints on glass. I'm just taking a sponge, tappity tap 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 in all over. These, again, are tailor-made to something that I wanted personally. So I wanted these to be very vintage, and I wanted them to be able to show a little bit of light through if I chose to put fairy lights in here. So I left them just like that. And I also did not sand them. That was on purpose. I wanted them to have a little bit of a rustic vintage feel. Here is the pretty napkin we're using. And believe it or not, I'm going to pull the peach and the green out of this, not the blue. So I want to mix up two colors that kind of will blend with the napkin colors I'm trying to pull out, which is that peachy color. And I'm literally just putting little dots, mixing little dots till I get a color that I think is really similar. And they always look different when they dry. But I thought while wet, this peach color was almost spot on with what I ended up with. Now for the green color, I just kept it this. I thought that would work just fine because the little stems in the napkin were so tiny, you couldn't really see them. Then I used two different paintbrushes to just kind of blot on the colors, not blending them, blot on the colors in the center of these jars. And I did that around the whole piece on both of them. And I just alternated. I did the peach first and then went with the green afterwards and made sure that they were their own individual colors. They didn't blend together to make another color that would be peach and green. Now I want these to blend in, so I'm taking a dry brush with a little bit of the white paint, and before we decoupage, because I don't want any of this stuff on my paper and my little design, I'm just dry brushing over the colors that we did. And since we didn't blend them together, they're gonna pop through this white dry brushing just perfectly. To decoupage the napkin pieces, I did the same thing with the water and the paintbrush to get little strips of the exact designs that I wanted, and then made sure that the Mod Podge was completely around the middle and just on the top and the bottom where I wanted the paper to go with the design or the napkin. And then I took more Mod Podge and went over the napkin as well as it started to dry to clear up some of the edges that had went over into the middle. I just took a little bit of that water and my fingernail and got the extra off. Now we can't leave it like this. I want those little words to pop out. So I'm going to just take a permanent black marker and gently brush over them so they pop. You could use paint for this. You could use Gilding Wax for this. You could use the mica powder paint for this. Whatever makes you fuzzy inside. I just felt like this was simple. It was easy. I have a lot of black industrial stuff in my house. Love that look. So this is going to just give me that edge on these kind of shabby chic vintage but yet a little bit of farmhouse looking pieces that we're creating here. I continued highlighting everything that popped out around the jar, and when I was finished it looked like this compared to this, so I really felt like it just took it up a notch. Next I am going to add some of Dollar Tree's nautical rope to the top into the little handle of this jar. To accomplish that, I'm just using some tacky glue. I think that works so well whenever I'm using fabric on glass and stuff like that. So I am gently just wrapping it around, holding it in place, and that's it for these. As always, people, thank you all so much for hanging out with me today. I appreciate you so much. I hope you enjoyed these creative and unique glass decoupage DIYs. Got a little artsy here on y'all, but hopefully they inspire you and gave you some unique things to be able to try at home for yourselves. Here they are all together in my entryway. I love them so much. And until next time, bye.